Greetings, urban farmers, gardeners, and healthy food visionaries. Farmer Greg here, and welcome to the 519th episode of the Urban Farm Podcast, where every day we work together to educate and inspire you to become part of your food revolution. Have you ever pondered why you do what you do? Well, I have for over 4 decades. And I do all of this because I believe the most important thing that we can be doing right now is learning where our food comes from and how to grow our own. Our food structure in this country is in crisis. It delivers food that is unhealthy and is a delivery system that is tenuous at best. Over the decades, I've seen the extraordinary impact that small groups of people can have on the global food consciousness community. And I need your help. If you find value in the Urban Farm Podcast, please consider joining the Urban Farm Patron community to support the work we do. In exchange for subscribing, you will receive content and bonuses far beyond the free podcast episodes that we deliver. Plus, I am committed to making sure the value you receive goes far beyond what you contribute. Visit urbanfarmpodcast.org to see what you receive when you join us in revolutionizing our food system. Please consider supporting our work. It might be the most important thing you ever do. Today on our podcast, we have someone who's growing enough food to provide for a family of 4 all year long. We're talking with Melissa Norris about feeding a family. Melissa is a 5th-generation homesteader and believes everyone can and should grow some of their own food. She is the host of the amazing podcast, Pioneering Today, and founder of the Pioneering Today Academy, where she teaches people how to live a homegrown and homemade life in a modern world. Welcome to the show today, Melissa. Are you ready to rock?
Hey, I'm ready to roll.
Excellent. So I shared a bit about you. Can you fill in the blanks for us and share more about the path you took to get where you're at today?
Absolutely. So I say I'm a 5th-generation homesteader. Honestly, I'm sure it goes much further back because I hail from a long line of people who were just simply raising their own food and providing for themselves off of the land, which now we call homesteaders. And of course, back in the pioneer days, homesteaders were actually the people who were taking advantage of the Homesteading Act. But for me, my dad, so it's kind of a funny story, but I want to give this preface. So I feel actually very blessed by it now. I didn't so much when I was a teenager and younger.
Right.
But right? Yeah. Oh gosh, hindsight. So much looking back. We didn't appreciate back then. We do now. But I was raised, my dad was older. Him and my mom are actually 19 years apart, and I'm from his second marriage. And so my dad was actually born in the 1930s and raised through the Great Depression as a young child. But when the Great Depression ended, it really didn't change the way that they lived. They still relied very much so. If they didn't grow it and preserve it for the winter months, then they weren't going to eat a lot of the time. So I say that because by the time I came along, of course, that wasn't our situation. We always had a garden. My dad always raised our own beef cattle. We actually always had our own meat source, raised a vegetable garden, had fruits and vegetables. But a lot of the practices now that I have as a gardener and just in life were because he went through those hard times where you had to be self-sufficient and self-sustainable. And of course, your food is one of those aspects. So I learned to garden from the time I could walk. I mean, every memory as far back as I have in the summertime is you were planting the garden. So I was helping to put the seeds in and cover it and weeding, of course, and then snapping the beans and helping my mom can. And I thought every family grew up that way. I think when you're little, a lot of times you kind of have, that you think the whole world is what you know.
Right.
And it wasn't right until I got in high school. And then I realized as I went to other friends' house and got more out in the world that not everybody actually did that wasn't necessarily the norm. And then I got married at 18. My husband and I just celebrated 20 years of marriage.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so he had grown up in town, no, a little town. I had grown up in the country and he'd grown up in town. And so we got married in September. And so the first spring rolls around, summer's coming, and I'm like, hey, we need to figure out if we can borrow somebody's rototiller or have somebody come and rototill up the ground because we got to get ready for a garden. And he just kind of looked at me and he's like, you want to do a garden? And I remember looking at him like, what do you mean want to? It's not what, it's like, it's what you do.
Hmm.
Like in my mind, there was no question of are we or aren't we? It was absolutely how big do we want it? That's the question I in my
Yes.
mind. Yeah.
Love that.
So thankfully, my city boy quickly turned a country boy and he jumped right in. We've had a garden every year since and increase it every year as well, and now raise all of our own meat and everything. But that was kind of the beginning. And so I always had a garden, but the real tipping point for me was about 10 years ago. And it's funny because as I said, I always have raised some of our own food and canned and put that up and cooked our meals, but I didn't realize, especially in those more newlywed younger days, that a lot of the things I was cooking it at home, but I didn't realize that different box mixes of this, even though I was assembling things and putting it in, the oven and providing dinner, it wasn't takeout or frozen things necessarily. I didn't really realize though the quality of the ingredients and some of the things what was in, a box cake mix and these hydrogenated oils and just different things like that. And so it was about 10 years ago that I had really bad acid reflux and ulcers, stomach ulcers, to the point where I was actually on taking prescription medications, the max dose that you could, up to 6 times a day, having to time my eating around these. And it was
Wow.
it's such a bad stage. And that I was in my late 20s at that point, had just had my daughter, so I had two little kids. And they sent me to a specialist who said, we don't know what's wrong with you. We need to go and do a scope because obviously this is not normal and you cannot stay on these doses of medications. You've already been on these doses way longer than you should have been. So I went and had my upper stomach, and my esophagus biopsied. Actually, when they were in there with a scope, they came across some areas that they wanted to biopsy. So they biopsied them. And thankfully, they came back benign. So I didn't have cancer, which praise the Lord, but I had cellular change, which of course can be a precursor to cancer. And I was on all of these meds and I was still having that much erosion and different things happening. So the specialist, I'm still so grateful for a conventional medical doctor as a specialist. And he just looked at me and he said, you have to figure out a way to control this with your food.
Oh.
So I have to say, when he told me that I needed to control it with my food, I was a little bit irritated because I thought, are you kidding me? Like, I'm already on this max dose. I can't sleep at night. I was at probably one of the thinnest points of my life. I was really unable to eat most of the time. And you're telling me you want me to go off all this medication, which is barely helping me to be even able to function. And I just need to figure it out by what I'm eating. So I was a little irritated, threw the papers in the car and kind of fumed on my way home, if I'm being honest.
Uh-huh.
But then I'm like, okay, I've got this chance and I'm going to roll up my sleeves and we're going to do it. And so I sat about investigating and looking at the foods that I was eating. And he had a list of kind of what a lot of people will experience as their trigger foods that can trigger heartburn and that type of thing. But I really started to investigate. And for me, on my investigations, it was cutting out where I first started, I should say, a lot of the processed food. So I wanted no GMO crops. I didn't want any high fructose corn syrup, hydrogenated oils. It was just getting back to really basic food. And at that time, I didn't realize how much of what I was cooking had these other ingredients in it.
Right.
So, right. And the way it was processed and what these things actually did to our bodies and etc. So at that time, 10 years ago, in order to avoid a lot of these things, I either had to start growing and making it myself. Surprisingly, a lot of your tomato sauce and your condensed cans of soup that you're using, they've got these hydrogenated oils, a lot of oils that are from high GMO crops, etc. A lot of corn syrup. I could not believe how many things had high fructose corn syrup in it. Almost everything, if it had an ingredient label, wasn't a fresh produce, had it in there. And we've come a long way, actually, even as in society and food, a lot more awareness and things, even than we did back then. So that was really where it all, my awareness. And like I said, to be able to afford it and or to find the foods, we had to begin growing more than we were and putting it up. And thankfully, that it worked. I was able to get off all of the medications. I've never had to go back on them. It's been over 10 years, been completely healed. And then I've seen so much transformation and benefits in my own health and in just healthier in so many ways now in my 30s than I was in my 20s. And it all relates back to to our food and the way it's grown and what we're eating, and it's just amazing. So that's how all of it came to be, really the podcast and the books and teaching people how to do the same things. And I did all of this too while still working a day job as a pharmacy tech. Actually, my husband works a day job, and we started raising all of our own meat and increasing more and more. And I say that because a lot of people I know think, like I did when I first started, like, oh my goodness, most people, when they did this as homesteaders back in the day, that was their full-time job. Most of
Right.
them weren't going off the farm and working like we are. How am I going to make this work? It seems impossible. But when you do it little bit by little bit, it really is doable, and you can make it work.
So is this what you do full time now?
It is what I do full time now.
Yay.
Yes, yeah. My husband still works his day job, actually, but 2 years ago, it's been about 2 years and 3 months since I'm doing this, to doing it full time. So for about 8 years, I worked a day job and then did all of this and, all the life stuff together. So I really learned a lot of hacks, so to speak, that allowed me to just streamline everything and do it in the least amount of time possible without sacrificing yield or, still using organic natural methods, etc.
Right. Well, and really growing your own food, there's the setup and the harvesting and then waiting in between.
Yeah, once you have your infrastructures in place, basically, if you're not putting in a brand new garden every year, breaking new ground or new beds or greenhouses or whatever it is you're doing, once that's in, you're right. You have this lull period when it's growing, even kind of before the harvesting, depending on if you're doing succession planting and spring and summer and fall crops and all of that. But once it's in and you've got that foundation, you're right. It's not that much work. It's more the setup and getting started than I think anything else is where a lot of your work comes in.
Yeah. And one of the ways that you express this or share this with people is with a podcast, which I was recently on your podcast. Now you're here. Tell me about how your podcast happened, because you're doing a great job with that.
Oh, thank you. Well, funny thing on the podcast. So I live extremely rurally, and we have a little small radio station that was sub offshoot of a community college probably about 40 miles away from where I live. And they wanted to have a local radio station, which I think is awesome, and wanted to support them. And a lot of the hosts looking for local things and people to have on the show had found my website where, sharing about growing and your own food and cooking it and all those fun things. And so they asked if I'd be on some of their radio shows, if they could come out and I'd do a radio show with them. And of course, I'm like, oh, yeah, I love to talk and I love to share. I really do. And so they kept asking me to be on their shows, and different hosts would be asking me to come on. And so I was doing multiple interviews on multiple different hosts' shows for this radio. And so finally, the producer just sent me an email and said, hey, can you just do your own show with us? And I'm like, oh,
Nice.
yeah, I'd never even considered it. Was nothing that ever crossed my mind. And I thought, well, I don't know how. Like, you're gonna have to walk me through what to do. But sure, I would love to. So I did. I started doing a weekly show for our local radio station, and I was still working my day job at that point. And so getting into their studio to record around the other people's recording times and the live shows and my day job was getting to be really cumbersome. And it was kind of like, okay, I can't keep doing this. It's just not working. And so I asked him, I said, well, what if I got some equipment and recorded at home? And then I just give you the recordings and you guys can air them. And they said, yeah, that would work great. And I'd had a lot of people were on my email newsletter and just on social media and stuff. And they knew I was doing a radio show and they wanted to listen in. But at that time, it was so small, there was no capability for people to listen in on the internet. It was only if you were local on the radio waves. And so that was how the podcast was actually born, because I said, okay, well, if I record these myself, I can put them up online. I'll have the files and then anybody can listen. So that the beginning of the podcast was actually a local radio show.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thanks.
And you've gotten pretty far with it.
Yeah, I started the podcast. Oh my goodness. I think it was the end of 2013 or the beginning of 2014. So quite a while ago, really. And we're still going stronger than ever. I'm now doing 2 episodes a week. And I think for so many people in this day and age, myself included, listening to podcasts, we have the freedom now that we can listen to subjects that we want to,
Hmm.
that we're interested in, that are gonna help us, that are teaching us and motivating us and inspiring us and all of that. And so I am a podcast junkie. I don't weed the garden. I don't drive anywhere. I don't even clean the house without listening to some podcast or an audio book. And so it's been so much fun to see more and more people tune into podcasts and loving and having that freedom and getting to, listen and learn about things that are important to them. And so it's been just so amazing to see the rise of podcasts, I guess you could
Yeah.
say.
I'm going to ask you a question, but I'm also going to answer the question after you answer it. And that is, what is your favorite thing about doing a podcast? Because you've got hundreds of episodes.
Yeah, 222 actually on the day that
Congratulations.
thank you. Recording this 222 just went live. I think my favorite thing about podcasts is we get to connect with other people on a different level than you get by just reading written material. There's a different intimacy and I feel like a deeper level of sharing of knowledge and inspiration. And the accessibility of it, like I can listen to someone who is in a different country if I want to, who's definitely in a different state, and we don't have that barrier anymore of location or being able to get where they're at. It's laid out there for us. It's there.
Yeah, I so hear you on that. And my favorite thing is connecting with people like you. I get to make friends all over the world talking about what I love to talk about.
It is amazing because you and I, yeah, we're in totally different states. You're in
Yep.
Arizona. I'm in Washington. It's really amazing. And it's the same thing for the listeners. Like we get to create this community and meet these people that in no other time would we be able to
Right.
do it. We're really living in a special time. It's got its faults. Every time period does, but there's a lot of good happening right now.
Amen to that. So I have one more real quick story that I want to share. I have taught at Arizona State University, our one of our state universities here, and so I have a ASU email address. And I'm going to say 3 years ago, I get this email from this woman from Australia, and she was looking for data on urban farming from Arizona State University. So that wasn't me, but I connected her with somebody at Arizona State University that could help her. And then I got a follow-up email from her. And because the email came into my ASU address, but I sent her one from the urban farm address. So I get an email response from her and she said, "Oh my gosh, you're that Greg Peterson?" She's an attorney in Australia that listens to my podcast on her way to work in the morning.
Oh my goodness.
Isn't
How
that great?
awesome.
Isn't that great?
That is amazing.
Yeah. So just this connectivity, possibility that we have is it's mind blowing for me. And I think you're right about this being this way to connect is a really good thing.
Yeah, it is. And too, like you said, those stories, when you actually get something from someone that says, I listened to you,
Mm-hmm.
it inspired me, it motivated me, I took your step and I did this, and it's changed their life. I've never grown anything before. I wanted to grow a tomato plant, and now in 1 year I have this full garden in my backyard, and they send you a picture. It's very humbling,
Yes.
actually.
Yes.
It's really amazing to see. But yeah, and it sounds so, you hear people say, oh, life changing. Like that term gets thrown around a lot, but it really is true. Podcasts have changed my life. I've listened to podcasts that have totally changed my life. And to know that we get to have that effect on someone, I don't know. It's it's really cool. I'm going to say, I sound all gushy right now, and I totally am.
Mhm. Yeah,
So I
you
hope
and
I sound that way.
I'm
Yeah.
with you. So let's go out in the garden and talk about growing food a little bit. And in your bio, you said that you grow enough food for your family all year around. What crops do you raise enough of that last a whole year?
Yeah, so quite a few actually. And I should say that with some season extenders, I am in a northern growing climate. So, like right now in the middle of December, I still have kale. I've got beets and lettuce that are under some season extenders there to keep them warm. The kale is not, and I've still got Brussels sprouts that I'm harvesting from. But everything else, warm weather crops, I have a pretty short growing season from about the end of May to about mid-September is when I have to grow everything else that's not a cold weather crop. So we raise enough of when it comes to vegetables. So I do all of our tomato products. So we raise and can up all of my tomato sauce, pizza sauce, pasta sauce, all the salsa, stewed tomatoes, all the things you would make with tomatoes, green beans, garlic. I think this year we'll actually have a full year's worth of onions. Well, it'll be close. I may have to, at the very end, get a few before springtime comes, but I think we're going to get there. Pretty much all of our fruit, except tropical. I can't do citrus here. And of course, tropical fruit's not going to grow either. And occasionally I'll buy some fresh apples if the kids are getting tired of doing dehydrated and applesauce and all those things. But otherwise, all of our berries, I don't buy any berries from the store. We raise all of our berries and preserve and put them up. Rhubarb, a year's worth of rhubarb. Pretty much all of my herbs, unless they're like a spice or something like that, but pretty much all of our herbs I'm growing a year's worth of as well. It might be easier to say what I'm still buying from the store, I think,
Right.
honestly,
Wow.
than
Good
vice versa.
job.
So yeah, it's been a journey. It's been an evolution. I've always raised a year's worth of green beans. So even when my husband and I were first married, I've never purchased green beans from the store. But at that time, it was the only thing I was growing and preserving a full year's worth of. And we've added in all the other crops and all of our own meat as well. I know we're talking about gardening, but we are self-sufficient on our own organic, grass-fed, pasture-raised beef, pork, and chickens.
Wow. Cool. I'm much closer to being a vegetarian these days. I eat very little meat, but a few years ago, I figured, well, I still eat poultry, so I should raise some in my backyard. So right here in the middle of Phoenix, I'm going to say about 8-9 years ago, over the course of 2 years, I raised 25 meat chickens from chick to plate. And I did the whole process myself. It was eye-opening.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. We do both meat chickens. We do meat birds in the spring, so they're butchered by midsummer.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've got my hens that are year-round and are mostly laying year-round. Right now, they're kind of in the middle of winter. I don't use a heat lamp, so I don't force them to lay. I let them follow nature's cycle personally.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not getting fresh eggs right now, but that will pick up again in about a month. So almost year-round, I get fresh eggs.
Yeah, exactly. Well, even in Phoenix, and it's not too cold here. Our hens have stopped laying. It's just wintertime. We get about 9 hours of light, and they don't lay when there's not enough light.
Right, absolutely. And their body needs a break from it, I think.
Yes.
Of course, everybody has their own theory and everything like that. But just my personal opinion, I think it's good for them to have that break. I think that's the way God designed them, and I'm fine
Right?
with letting them do that. Yeah.
Exactly. So how much land or space does somebody need to grow a year's worth of food?
I know you know this, Greg, but really less than you think. So, in full disclosure, with all of our livestock, I do have 14.96 acres, almost 15 acres of land.
Wow,
But
nice.
it is. It's wonderful. We're very blessed. But the majority of that is either pasture for the animals and then forest land, actually. Where I'm growing my vegetables and my fruit, so our produce, is just in my backyard and is actually on a half an acre of all that acreage is where all of the produce is being grown. So we can grow all of that in just a half an acre, and you can even grow even in less than that if you need to. Obviously, you can use any space and find a way to grow your own food. But yeah, half an acre. So it's just our backyard where we've got all the perennials and then the annual vegetable garden and the herbs and all of that fun stuff. So you can do it in a pretty small space. I think people get an idea that you've got to have vast acres and these huge fields in
Mm-hmm.
order to do it, and you don't.
Well, and if you believe Mel Bartholomew and the Square Foot Gardener, if you have 1,000 square feet of space, you can grow enough food.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and what I'm continuously amazed at is the amazing abundance that comes out of our gardens.
Oh, it is amazing. Like I said, we even here having a cold climate, I'm growing spring crops. So I pretty much grow three gardens a year. I grow a spring garden, I grow an annual summer vegetable garden with our warm weather, and then I'm growing a fall garden, and I'm still reaping the benefits of when I planted in September and we're in December. And that will, I'll be able to harvest off of those probably into January. And then it's really only about February and the beginning of March that I don't have anything in the ground other than the garlic that's just doing its thing.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of people too, we get in our head, depending on where you live. Now, I realize that if you're in a southern climate, you don't do as much gardening in the dead of heat of summer. But a lot of times we get in our head like it's just a one thing. And a lot of people are like, well, I just do my summer garden and that's it. But you can very easily plant so many crops almost year long in most climates.
Right. Well, in our time here, so I live in the desert Southwest, our no time is really July through September because it's just too dang hot. But the rest of the time, we've always got stuff growing.
Yeah, so we're just flipping it. Mine's just like, December through February.
Yep.
Yeah,
Right.
but yeah, the rest of the time you can find things for your area. And I think that's another key thing too is you can grow a lot and you can grow more and longer than you think if you are picking the varieties that are well suited to your growing climate. Because if you're trying to, just like you, like down there in Arizona, if you're trying to grow brassicas when you've got 85, 90-degree weather,
Yep.
they're just not going to do very well. So
Yep.
you do have to pick items and plants that do well for your natural climate. And you can kind of baby them. Like I use season extenders with doing row covers and frost protection and that kind of thing to push it out a couple of weeks, 4 weeks on the beginning and then on the end of different vegetables too. So you definitely can do that. But I am not going to try to grow sweet potatoes or okra here because it would just require way too much work and I probably wouldn't get anything anyways.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So tell me about Pioneering Today Academy.
Yeah. So the Pioneering Today Academy, it's so funny. So the whole Pioneering Today thing, well, is I love taking the best of those old fashioned homesteading pioneer skill sets they had 150, 200 years ago, but figuring out a way to use them in our modern world because I have electricity. We're not totally off the grid. And though I could survive that way, and we've had 2 weeks without power here, and we frequently have power outages. So I know I've got the skill sets to do it. As long as we have the availability of a lot of these modern conveniences, I plan on using them.
Right.
And so what I wanted to do is to find the best of these old fashioned skill sets so that they're not lost and that we're getting the benefit of these, but figuring out a way to do it in a modern world, like I said, with day jobs and everything else that we have to do. And so that's really what my website is. And the radio show, it was actually one of the editors and producers said, well, we got to come up with a name for it. What about Pioneering Today? And I'm like, oh, great. That sounds good. So everything has been born off of
Wow.
that. Yeah. So the academy this is when I was still working my day job, but I had a couple of I had a book out and the website and the podcast. And I had people asking me, they're like, I really wish you could do more videos and that you could walk me through how to do everything, or I could come to your homestead and learn with you. Like, I really just need more hands-on. And I was like, at that time, I was still working. I'm like, I'm already getting up and doing, 3 or 4 hours worth of work before I leave and go to my day job and then staying up late at night. I'm like, I cannot do any more than I'm doing right now for free, just to be blunt.
Mm-hmm.
And so the academy, I wanted to do more video and I wanted to be able to help people on a deeper level. And I would love for people to be able to come, but it's not feasible for most people to fly to where my homestead is
Right.
and to come. And I had people all over. So I did a beta launch and I said, okay, I'm going to try out this membership where I'm giving you so many videos every single month and I can do some lives with you and all of this stuff and just kind of see what happens. And that was back in March of 2016. And so I would film it before I would go to work. I would come home and edit it myself and then get it uploaded. And I did that for 3 months. And that was kind of my test to both the people who were coming in and they knew that we're going to see how this works. And you guys let me know what you like and give me feedback and how I can help you more. And after 3 months, I'm like, okay, I've done this for 3 months. I can keep doing this. I'm not, I can keep this up. And so it started there. And then we just had more and more people coming in and people were having success, having people who had like never canned or preserved food before would come in. And 4 months later, she had over 400 jars of food preserved.
Oh,
And then her husband,
nice.
Oh, it's amazing. That in itself is amazing. But then her husband lost his job unexpectedly. And she's like, I'm going to cry. She's like, I don't have to worry because I have all of this food put up. And I've never done this before. And it's such a blessing. And so I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to get teary eyed.
No,
Um,
please.
so when I see things like that, it's just so amazing. And then more people, were hearing about it and wanting to come in and to join. And so we've been growing. And then that also enabled me that I got to the point where I'm like, okay, this is, I'm able to quit my day job and I'm able to do this full time and to do more and to deliver more to them and to grow it. And so that's how I was able to quit my day job a couple years ago and do it the academy full time. So
Nice. Congratulations.
thank you.
And that I always call those when I move to tears like that, and it happens. My listeners know it happens for me. When somebody's sharing a story, I was moved to tears a moment ago when you were sharing that. This is the reason I do this, is because we are making a difference for people out there.
Yeah, it's amazing. Honestly, I think we should be wouldn't it be wonderful if all of us have parts in our lives where we are getting that emotional about it?
Yep.
Because, yeah, I think we need to live in a society that embraces that a little bit more than we do.
You think?
Yeah, I do.
Absolutely. So you have a free gift for our listeners. Tell them about it.
I do. So I'm super excited. So my new book, The Family Garden Plan, which is grow a year's worth of sustainable and healthy food. So my publisher let me take directly from the book the how much to plant per person for a year chart. And it's not, we go through all alphabetically, all of the vegetables, but all of your fruits as well. So if, a semi-dwarf tree, how much does that actually put off in fruit production? Your berry plants, all of those charts and worksheets so that you can figure out, because every family size, depending on how much you're eating of a specific crop, is going to determine how much you need to plant to take you through an entire year. If that's your goal, how much do you need to plant for that? Yours is going to be different than mine, most likely. So it's the worksheets that walk you through very practically and very easily how to determine how much that is for a year, what your family's need would be per crop. And then you just go to this chart and it tells you this is how much you need to plant to get this yield. So it really walks you through it in a very tactical, easy way. And they said that we could take those charts, which are just some of the charts from the book, and I could actually give them away to people for free. So you can snag those for free at the book website. You can also check more out about the book, but it's at familygardenplan.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
Absolutely. I'm going to shift on you. And I would like for you to talk about a time you failed, how you overcame that failure, and what you might have learned from it.
Oh my goodness, I have to pick one, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I think I was thinking about this question actually, because I know you asked this on your show. And I was thinking this morning, and really, I think one of the things that I would consider one of my biggest failures or regret would be that I stayed in a job that I did not, I would actually cry by Friday morning because it was a Monday through Friday job. There were times when I would be crying Friday morning because I really was that unhappy in where I was at a time. And I stayed in there way longer. For years I stayed at this position and in this job because I'm like, well, we got to make ends meet, which we do. I mean, you have to have money in order to live. But I wish that I had had more confidence in myself and more faith that if I were to leave a situation that was making me literally that miserable, that I would be able to find something else would come along, and that I wouldn't have stayed just kind of stuck in that thing, which was my fault. I mean, I'm the only one that can make the changes. I could have chosen to invest and to learn something else, I could have, but I was just like, well, this is my job and this is what life is and this is this is what I'm doing. I really wish, looking back, I consider that a failure, that I stayed there and didn't make any concrete things to really change it more than I did, and to change myself, basically.
Yeah. And this is the ultimate reason that I do this podcast, is so that people can see the pathway from getting out of a job that they hate.
Yeah. Because life, oh my gosh, now looking back, Oh, I would tell my kids the same thing. No job, there will be something else that will come up.
Hmm.
You will be able to find something. And then with their homesteading skills that, that they've learned from me and from my father, I'm like, you're never gonna go hungry. You'll find something. And I believe too, as a person of faith, that God will open a door
Hmm.
when you take that faith a step forward, that something will come up. It might not all be easy, and there's going to be some scary times figuring it out, but I would never stay in a situation that long ever again.
Yeah, amen to that. There's a quote out there, and I'm going to paraphrase it. It's the Scottish Himalayan quote for anybody that wants to look it up. And basically, what it says is that once one is committed, like truly committed, and steps forward in that commitment, magic happens and doors open. And I'm getting chills as I share this right now. And I have found in my life, I've been self-employed for 45 years. I'm almost 60 years old. I started my first business when I was 15. I've had one real job for the year of 1984. And I've been on my own since I was 21 years old. And I have never missed any payments that needed to be made. The universe has always stepped up and made sure that I had what I needed. Now, I was out there doing the work, making sure, just like you were out there doing the videos and all that stuff. I was out there doing the work, making sure, but the universe delivered. And it's magic how it happens.
It is. I agree. There's been so many things where I have said, like, you've written it down. There's something about writing it down, audibly speaking it,
Yes.
and then it comes, and then you see it, like, sometimes it feels like immediate, like within an hour. Sometimes it's been within the week, or sometimes it's been months. But yeah, there is something to that. I completely agree. And I've seen it played out so many times.
And it feels so good.
Yes. Yes.
And what do you consider your biggest success?
Oh, my biggest success. I think my biggest success would have to be my kids. And they're so young. My son's in his teens and my daughter's a preteen. But I say that because, like, my daughter, they had a school program, which actually was really cool, where they come in and they teach them how to make bread. It's through the King Arthur Flour Company has this program where they go into certain schools. I don't know if it's in all schools, but this year it was at my daughter's school. And they teach the kids how to make bread because so many kids don't know how to do that. They don't have parents that actually cook from scratch or know how to make bread. And what was really cool is my daughter, she helps me. She feeds my sourdough starter. Both my kids, if they want chocolate chip cookies, they have the recipe from my book. They know what page it's on.
They go
And
make them.
they have to make them. And I make them, they have to share. So one week my son is in charge of baking the cookies for the week. The next week it's my daughter so that it's equal. I want them both to know how to bake and cook. What was so amazing is she was excited about this program because she already knew how to make bread, or she's watched it. She hasn't baked a whole loaf entirely by herself, but it's a common occurrence for her. But she got to see how excited and how awesome her classmates thought this was because it's not common for them. And so I think that really felt like a success moment, is knowing that this is going to be my kids' normal. Now, I can't determine if they're going to continue on or not as adults. Obviously, that'll be, but they'll have these skill sets if they want to fall back on and to continue with. They'll know it as normal. And so hopefully it will continue to be their normal. So I really feel that that's my biggest success.
Nice. And what drives you?
Oh my goodness, so many things. But really what drives me is seeing the positive change in my own health, and then seeing other people's lives and they found healing, and spreading that, because I don't there's always going to be bad things that happen. And I'm a firm believer that what you choose to focus on is what you are going to see and is what is going to happen. And so I feel like we are surrounded by gloom and doom if you want to look at media headlines or things on social media, for example. But I don't buy that. I don't believe that. I think everybody, you can make a difference. You have to start with yourself, but if you start to seek out the good things and you start to spread that and to share that with other people, it's people in your own family. I mean, I get grumpy and my husband will call me out on it. He's like, "You're being really short." And I'm like, you're right. I'm sorry. And so I have to make that flip for myself sometimes with my own self, but in our interactions with other people and in society as a whole. And when people are feeling healthier and feeling better because of their food and they're able to grow it themselves and then they're able to spend time with their family and they're teaching them, like I just see it as this, it's like that little seed. You plant that seed and then it grows and it sprouts and it becomes so many other plants. And it's that ripple effect that's what motivates me, is to see that change happening and being able to be a part of it.
Sweet. And if you could recommend one book for our listeners, what would it be and why?
I have to recommend one. Okay, I'm a voracious reader. Let me just tell you that. But right now, one of the ones that I'm most excited about and that I have actually been implementing some new things and testing and having a lot of fun with is Superhuman by Dave Asprey. And that one I just find fascinating because so much of what I have experienced by growing my own food and being out in nature and just feeling so refreshed. I feel like gardening is food for the soul as well as the body. And then when you read or go through Dave's book, I'm actually listening to it on Audible, so I'm listening to it. But so much of what I experience by being out in nature, he's actually got like the science and is getting on a very deep level and scientific level on as to why and things that you can do to help improve and kind of biohack your own health. And I'm like, oh, that's
Wow.
why. Like, that's why. And oh, I need to do more of that, like on a daily basis to get it. Yeah. So it's very cool, and I kind of geek out about that kind of stuff. And so that's one of my favorite books right now. I'm just finding fascinating, as well as being able to do some of the things myself and like actually applicable at the same time.
Well, and I hear pretty clearly that you are deeply into gratitude. And does he touch on that in the book?
It's kind of more on biohacking, like by different ways. So kind of like more on your health, on like your food and then like your environment. So it's not
Interesting.
so much, this one in particular isn't so much on gratitude, though he is grateful because if you get to hear his story, that he came from extremely poor health, like 300 plus pounds, just really, really a lot of issues, health issues, and to the point he's at now. And so he's been so grateful to be able to discover and to feel better that he continues to invest into this science and these studies. And he does science experiments on himself that I would never do on myself. Like once you have the data, that's one thing, but I'm like, I'm glad somebody's willing to do it, but I'm like, wow, dude, you're hardcore. Like, but I'm glad because now we've got this data type thing. But even it was just like, and what I like about the book is he says, like, if you've got a lot of money, this is like the high level way to do it. But if you don't, then this is like the easy ways that you can still get results from and do it. And so I really appreciate that he's kind of showing and giving you all the different options.
Nice. And the
Yeah.
name of the book again is?
Superhuman by Dave Asprey. He's the bulletproof guy. If you've
Oh,
got
yes.
bulletproof coffee, bulletproof
Yep.
diet guy. Yeah. Yeah. It's his newest book. I actually haven't read his other books, but yeah, very, very interesting. Yeah. I'm really enjoying it.
I can tell.
Yeah.
And what one final piece of advice do you have for our listeners?
So my final piece of advice is that thing that you're thinking about, or you're like, man, I really should do XYZ. Maybe it's you're like, I know I need to move my body more. I know I need to do working out a little bit more. Or I know I probably need to stop buying this and find some type of healthier version, make it at home, whatever it is. Maybe you're like, I need to get more sleep at night. I know I'm not getting enough sleep. Whatever it is, do it. Stop waiting. Make a commitment. There's that commitment thing again.
Yes.
Make a commitment. Maybe you're just going to say, okay, I am committing to moving my body 5 days a week for a minimum of 15 minutes. You don't have to go to the gym. You don't have to get a gym membership. And then you just decide you commit, and that's what you do. So doing the commitment, pick the one thing, do the commitment, and do it.
Nice. Nice. I have to say, when we a few weeks ago, we recorded me for your podcast. And when I got done, my smile was kind of sore because I was so happy having that conversation. And I'm in that same place again today. I love the level of conversation that we have. Thank you so much.
Yay. Oh, Thank you. It's so much fun to surround yourself. And I have to say motivation wise, because oftentimes we'll make that commitment, right? We'll
Hmm.
start out kind of like New Year's resolutions. You make the commitment, you're doing the thing, and you do awesome for a day, a week, maybe 2 weeks. And then all of us kind of reach that point where we kind of start to maybe fade a little bit. And so I have found that podcasts on the subject of the thing that I'm wanting to do, if I listen to a podcast about it at least once a week, that it really does help keep me motivated and keeps me in and doing it. So if it's gardening, like obviously if you're listening to this one, this podcast, or doing more things the homemade and natural route, raising more of your own food, or if it's fitness or if it's health, find a podcast, find an audiobook, find something and get yourself plugged into that, because it does make a difference on us keeping doing it longevity wise and having those long-term successes, which all of this is about. Really, this needs to be long term. Like, I'm going to never stop growing my own food, and every year my goal is to grow one more thing than
Hmm.
a year's worth than we did the previous year, and so that's every year we add to it. But you don't want to just make a change for a little bit of time. You want your whole life to be better. And so that's been one of the key things for me, is making sure I stay plugged into resources in all the different areas, self-development, whatever, on a weekly basis to help keep me motivated and on track.
Wow, cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Melissa.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you so much.
So, how can somebody get a hold of you? Let's start there.
Yeah. So if you're into podcasts, which if you're listening this far, you, my friend, are a podcast junkie just like me. High five. So the Pioneering Today podcast. And then at my website, melissaknorris.com, you will find the blog, you will find the podcast episodes, but they're on all the podcast apps, however you're listening to it, and lots of freebies, as well as my book, The Family Garden Plan, and that chart, that free chart on how much to plant per person, and that worksheet to help you figure out how much you need on what crops for your family specifically.
Nice. So that's familygardenplan.com.
Yeah.
Excellent. And you can also find show notes from today's podcast at urbanfarm.org/pioneering today. Hey, if you've enjoyed this podcast and are interested in listening to my first podcast series, Freshly Green from 2007, you can subscribe to support the Urban Farm Podcast. With that, you will have access to Freshly Green and so much more bonus content. Visit urbanfarmpodcast.org to find out more and to pledge your support.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.